Hey everyone, here we are at episode 11 of season 5 of Radical Embodiment, the podcast. Today I am so excited. I'm always excited, but one of my dearest friends is on the podcast, Dr. Diane Mueller, also known as the Libido Doc. Dr. Diane is a seasoned sexual wellness authority. She blends a strong educational foundation with a rich clinical and teaching experience. In the interview, Diane, she just shares so much wisdom, insight that's really tangible, that's relatable, but also has, the science to back it up. So we talk a lot about the importance of touch in a lot of different contexts and how that really supports our overall health and well-being and just journey in embodiment, both receiving touch and just self-touch. Diane has her own podcast called The Libido Lounge, her own online training institute, and she trains medical professionals worldwide in functional medicine. So I hope you enjoy this interview and gain some insight that really just helps inspire you to continue to take action that feels empowered, that it feels like it resonates with your heart and your truth, and that continues you further in your journey to loving your body and to just being able to experience more presence and pleasure in your life. All right, here's the interview. Hi, everyone. Here I am with one of my dearest friends, Dr. Diane Mueller, the Libido Doc. Diane, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Emily. I love every moment of our conversations always. I'm so glad we get this time today.
Me too. Me too. It's like just as we hit record, because Diane and I are really good friends, and so we've just been casually chatting, and then just hitting record, it just like landed in my system of like, oh, this is so wonderful. I get to interview you for my podcast. Like, what a sweet, sweet treat to get to connect in this way and get to share you with my audience. So thank you for being here. So we're going to start with a question. I always like to start with these conversations with what embodiment means to you.
Yeah, thank you. The way I would describe embodiment to me is largely connected to, I would say, the definition of the ability to experience presence and pleasure in my life. Because from a standpoint of embodiment, I look at it as like embodiment, the capacity to feel what's happening inside of my body via the senses, right? Via touch on my skin, wind in my hair, via taste in my mouth, smells, these sorts of things. So largely, I would say it's the ability to be so present within my body that I have the fullest experience of what it's like to be a human.
I love that. And what you just said, I mean, that so lands for me because really recently, the last couple weeks, what I've been walking around with in the forefront of my mind is really the like what we're supposed to be doing here as humans in this reality, in this world. Is it just to feel? Like, is that the great, that's what I'm currently like, I think that's the point. We're just supposed to feel.
Yeah.
And so I love that you brought like our humanness in it and that ability to feel both also like the presence and pleasure in your life. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's so much there, right? I love this exploration of yours of the ability to feel, because I think so many times as humans, it's like it's so easy to either run away from feelings or chase feelings. And that's very, very different than feeling just with what is, and just having that experience of like really feeling the sadness or really feeling the grief or really feeling the joy and all these different things. And so it's an interesting conversation. And I love that this is a huge part of your exploration right now, because I do think like a layer of that conversation for me is like truly like, what is it like to feel then exactly what is happening right now without like wishing a feeling away or chasing a different feeling, but just being okay with the exploration of whatever is arising in the moment.
Right.
Which is not always
And
easy to.
That's where I was going to go, right? I'm like, yes, it sounds incredible and so profound. And, I think especially like, one, I think to really feel and be with what is present, not wishing it away, not needing to change it, just acknowledging it means to be in our body, which a lot of us, it's been an unsafe place to be. It's been a place that maybe we don't trust, a place where maybe we don't want to be because of pain, because of disease, because of previous trauma or torment. So what I would love to like have you share with us some of your own journey of what has helped support you in increasing your capacity to really be with what is and really be with yourself. And um yeah, kind of take us through your own journey and story, if you don't mind, of coming more and more into relationship with yourself and relationship with your body.
Yeah, sure. So, there's so many things I would say, especially from my earlier childhood, that really took me out of my body. I had a lot of disease processes. I had crazy digestive problems. I had Lyme disease. I had points where I had crazy memory loss, pain so bad it felt like my legs were being sawed off. So I had a lot
Mm,
of like very disembodied experiences. In my early 20s, I had a sexual trauma. So that further basically disconnected from my body, and especially then from my, female parts, right? It really created like a lot of numbness inside of me. So there's been a lot of work, right? There's been a lot of work, a lot of highs and lows with getting back into my body. And it's truly, I would say, the most holistic process that I've gone through. It's anything from doing things to better care of my physical body, doing lab work and figuring out what's going wrong to make myself not comfortable physically in my body, and really healing that part. I was doing a lot of trauma work for the sexual trauma, which included psychotherapy work. I actually was working with a great art therapist for a while, who I was painting my feelings. And that was for me like a really good way of getting back into my body and processing that trauma. So that was all really amazing. And then another component really truly has been doing embodiment practices, things that you teach in some of your classes, for example, and things that are even things like rolfing, right? Even things that are related to what you do, these types of touch therapies, manual therapies that allow us to actually feel the misalignment, to feel the stuck places, to breathe into those places, to soften those places. And then, of course, also dance, right? This is something that you and I share in common, of like doing the sensual embodied dance, the pole dancing, and various types of, wiggle on the floor types of movement, right? To just really feel the pain, feel the pleasure, feel the stuckness, feel the areas that just need more love and touch. So I'd say it's been truly a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual practice, and that all of my
mm.
cells have needed, this kind of cornerstone of all of these methodologies to really bring myself back inside my body.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's a lot. You named a lot of different approaches, and I'm sure it was many years. I imagine it wasn't just like, wow, I snapped my fingers. I went to this weekend retreat and like I'm in my
Yeah.
body. I think embodiment is an ever-going journey. There's not like an end goal. Um, but I just want to even just briefly just mention the wiggle on the floor. Like I keep coming back to more and more like the importance of like just being on the floor and being on the ground and touch and contact, those two things that you mentioned. Because I think both are so important in relationship to helping our nervous system regulate. Like if you're not able in a position to afford, receive, whatever in between sessions, actual physical contact, or have both, but like literally just getting on the floor every day for 5 minutes, starting your day that way, ending your day that day, just like maybe it might feel weird at first, but just rolling around, wiggling, feeling the contact. Maybe you put a song on to help support your body and moving and finding, but it can just be a beautiful way to just kind of self massage, to kind of feel these parts of our body with that external feedback of the ground. And I think receiving touch, especially in a professional, like skilled setting is essential in helping to unwind the fascia, unwind the tissue to support our bodies to being able to be more resourced and increasing that capacity to be with what is.
Yeah, I think it's kind of linked back to the definition, right? Like of being embodied is being in the senses. And all of these
Mm.
types of things we're talking about, professional touch, professional rolfing, in many ways, that's what they're doing. It's like somebody's hands on part of our body, say our low back has had trauma and injury. And we have one of two things that happen so often, right? We either have like crazy pain in that scenario or numbness and sometimes a period of both. So just having somebody's hands on us to reconnect that brain nervous system connection, I think is so valuable for really allowing the brain to connect to this area that maybe we're not fully embodied in, we're not feeling, we're disconnected. And so that touch, I think, is so useful for really reestablishing that neurological connection.
1000%. Yeah. And what comes to me is safety. That touch helps,
Yes.
I think, that system find safety to be able to go to these unknown, unmapped, historically not safe, not feel good places. So I'm curious for you, if somebody is feeling unsafe in their body, or maybe there's a part of their body that feels unsafe to go into, um, or maybe it might just be maybe the unsafe isn't there. Maybe it's just like, oh, it's just numb. They feel nothing, which often correlates with your system not feeling safe and going there. Like what might you suggest to somebody of how to, begin to navigate with that?
There's so much to say here. And, to start this conversation, I
Mm.
think it's a good time to just remind our audience around like, remember if there's like truly something that you're unsafe with around past traumas, like if you need to process through it, of course, do that with a psychotherapist, right? Somebody that's
Yeah,
trained in how to
for
guide
sure.
that. Right. But beyond that, it's an area that I'm actually studying so much in my work at my libido doc practice, because
Mhm.
the amygdala, right, the fear center of the brain, is so easily activated in women. And it is as our self-protection mechanism, right? Like we do have a heightened amygdala in a lot of stress types of responses, a heightened fear center response, because that's our safety. Being oftentimes usually the physical weaker gender as females compared to males, it's so frequent that we can be in situations that could be dangerous if there was somebody, say, as a prey to us, right, as a predator to us. So essentially we are evolutionary primed for this amygdala, the safety versus fear center of our brain, to be more responsive and to remember those traumas, to remember those triggers. And this can be as simple as like basic emotional traumas that happen because a partner, a friend, a boss says that thing to us and it feels unsafe. And maybe it's not a huge trauma or trigger, but it still triggers that fear center. And this
Yeah.
is where it gets really cool in linking like some of the things we see in research to what you're, talking about here, what we're talking about around touch and trauma and touch and fear. Because what we really see is one of the best things that actually resets the amygdala is oxytocin. And oxytocin is that love, cuddle, touch hormone, has
Mm.
actually been doing so much studying on this. There's a study that shows, for example, that when we have a hug that is 20 seconds or longer, it has to be 20 seconds or longer, we release so much oxytocin that we actually start trusting the person we're hugging. So one of the podcasters I
And
was
is that
listening to,
specific to females? Sorry to interrupt. Is that specific to females or anyone?
one,
Just
but
curious, because I.
females have way more oxytocin receptors than men.
Mhm.
So likely females have a larger impact of it. Men have oxytocin receptors too, but we have so many more. It's how we regulate stress, right? Is through oxytocin. It's one of the best natural stress regulators. So, in this study and some of the research and podcasters that I've listened to that talk about this study, one of the things that's sometimes said is like, okay, if you're getting like a heebie-jeebie feeling from somebody and you already have like a sense of like, I don't think I should trust this person, actually intentionally do not give them a long hug. This would be a good time for the pat
Okay.
on the back, like bro hug kind of thing. Because that
Okay,
long
good to know. I was
hug,
afraid you were
right?
gonna say like just go for it 20 seconds. Yeah, I was like, ooh, I don't know. Okay, great.
Just for intuition, because the
Yeah.
oxytocin that you're getting in that hug, it creates so much trust and it calms those fear centers, it calms the amygdala. And so we want to make sure that we're getting that oxytocin to keep us out of fear, to help us with safety and all that. But we're also getting that at the right times when, of course, we feel like we want to be safe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So I want to kind of like put together some points just to backtrack and reiterate because what you said is like juice. It's so good. So you're talking about our amygdala, right? And that's sensing that we're not safe. And so to help retrain or recalibrate, if we can increase oxytocin, which we can do through touch.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So 20-second hugs with
20-second
people you
hugs.
or
Yeah,
love
so
or feel.
I've been actually doing something just this week, and I wish I would have read this research before we actually were hanging out on
I
Saturday.
know. I'm like, I know that we hugged and touched a lot, but I'm like, I wish I'd intentionally given you a 20-second at least hug
20
next
seconds
time.
is like, as I've like hugged people this week since I've read that, I've like been counting in my mind, and like 20 seconds is like oftentimes I'm realizing like, oh, my hugs are like 10 to 12 seconds, which is still a solid hug.
Sure, that's a solid hug. Yeah.
But it does
Yeah.
take longer to reach that 20-second. And that 20-second is definitely that magic oxytocin thing. So, even that, type of massage, right, where it's like the hands are never leaving the body for sometimes minutes at a time, right? So I don't know that, different types of massage. I haven't seen anything about different types of massage being specifically studied this way. But since hugs have, I would presumably then be able to extrapolate that it would be likely that touch in any way that is continuing for longer than 20 seconds will produce a lot of that. And I think that is where with massage and all these different types of body work, Rolfing and other things, that this is where some of the magic happens to the nervous system, because we're actually calming down the amygdala, which that alone in the conversation we're having around embodiment, that alone, like the moment we calm down the fear centers, the moment we're not in this hyper kind of adrenaline state where the mind is looking for all the things that it's scared of or that it's trying to avoid or it's trying to protect itself against. And that's when we drop that adrenaline, we drop out of that fear state. That's another thing that can just lead us back into the experience of embodiment. And really, like I said at the beginning, I think it's the experience of going through life with pleasure, with enjoyment of all the little things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that increases our ability to do that. Love that. Amazing. So I kind of would love to just hear a little of your journey from, working, you shared that you had Lyme, working with Lyme, you have a vast medical, naturopathic like background into moving into the libido doc.
Yeah.
And love like to have you just kind of talk us through a little of that journey and kind of how you got to the work you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in practice for almost 15 years now, and the bulk of my beginning of my practice was in Lyme disease, mold, illness, and a lot of chronic conditions, which create a lot of inflammation. These types of things create conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, arthritis, brain fog. So if any of those conditions, if you have any of those conditions, if anybody that's listening and you're like, I can't figure out what's going on, that's where like that area of expertise really has come in to find these hidden root causes of like why fatigue continues, why random pain or headaches or brain fog continues. So it's been that part of my practice has been beautiful, and it's really been great to serve that community because it's getting people out of these debilitating conditions, right? And one of the things that started coming up in this practice was libido would just randomly spontaneously come back, right? It wasn't the initial thing people sought me out for, because when people come in and they're barely functioning because of their fatigue and brain fog and other things, yes, they don't have a libido, but it's not like sex is not the first thing on the mind.
The
It's
primary.
right.
Yeah.
Let me survive my day first, right? But then later on, it's like people are starting to get to that point of being fully healed. A very, very common topic that would come up was, oh my gosh, my libido's back. Oh my gosh, I'm having sex again. Oh my gosh, my partner's so happy. Thank you, kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
that was, from the purely like clinical thing, like I started seeing these changes and these, by treating the root causes and seeing the libido change that way. So that's part of what drove that from a clinical perspective. From my own personal perspective, it also was driven by just my own curiosity as a researcher, a scientist, a doctor, and as a spiritual person, because I've been really interested in sex for most of my life. Like it's just been a huge part of my health and well-being. And I've been curious, right? There's been times where my libido would get really low. And there's been times where I would get bored in relationship, sexually with a partner. So I really, throughout my marriage and divorce, and seeing the things that I did wrong in that, the things that did not work in that, it really, all these different things is, really kind of came together to help me study with a lot of different relationship coaches, sex coaches, reading things on my own, studying things like Taoist sexology, since I have a background in Chinese medicine as well. So it's really the libido side has really come from seeing this clinically happening, doing research and seeing like the underlying reasons of what drives a low libido, plus my own personal curiosity and like how to keep relationships and monogamous relationships and long term, how to keep them novel, how to keep them exciting, how to keep that passion going. Because I think this is just such an area that we're not trained in, right? Society is like, oh yeah, there's this hot time at the beginning of the relationships and it's like normal when that dies out and just go deal with it. And like, who cares if you never have sex? And like, it's not important for women anyways. Like that's so much of the programming.
So
And
much BS.
what's that?
I said it's so much BS, specifically when you're like, oh, it's not that important to women anyway. I'm like, it's just not, it's just an old myth, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's also so interesting, right? Like sex has really been studied so much in men, right? And so like even in like the arousal of men, there's like this 4-phase model that we see that's been taught in schools forever. It's like this excitement, this plateau, this orgasm, and this kind of relaxing period after. And so that model was studied in men, and then it was just like assumed that women had the same model. So it's like so many women are like, well, I'm not feeling sexual. I'm overwhelmed. I'm overworked. I don't have a sex drive. And then Rosemary Basson is an amazing researcher who actually put out a very different model of female arousal that is like, I think just so revolutionary to women. And it's more of a circular model. And so it's basically things, for example, like physical connection and emotional connection bring arousal, and then arousal brings more physical and emotional connection. And there's more parts to it. But the point is, oftentimes arousal does not come first for women. So oftentimes, like when women, because of how our arousal system works, it's the physical touch. It's actually starting that intimate moment. It's starting the foreplay. And then once we're in it for maybe 10 minutes, that's when the arousal hits. And that's usually when I tell women this and they try it. And that's where it's like oftentimes it's like, oh my gosh, why don't I do this more often? Well, we don't do it more often sometimes as women and we don't prioritize it sometimes because we're waiting for that drive. And that drive actually doesn't initiate it. Oftentimes it happens after we start connecting and we're getting that oxytocin and we feel safe and we feel connected with our partner when we're already in it. And then we get the arousal, right?
Yeah, I love that. I'm so glad how you like mapped that out for us. So helpful.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
So
I think there's so much there that it's just an unfortunate thing how little the female sexual and the female pleasure response is studied, and how much like women think there's something wrong with them because
yes.
we're not responding like men.
Yeah. Or there's pain, or there's so many reasons, right? Like I'm like, why is it not the norm specifically for women who've given birth, C-section or vaginally? Why are they not given a certain amount of PT, pelvic floor, paid for sessions? Why is that not the norm? I don't like, I just don't, it's hard for my brain to comprehend how that's not the norm with all that we know. And that's not, and it's just like, quote unquote, normal for a woman who's given birth to, a baby, multiple babies, 15, 20 plus years down the road, who, oh, she runs, she sneezes, she jumps, she pees a little. I'm like, that doesn't actually have to be normal. That's dysfunction. And that's dysfunction in our medical system in this case. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And all those things are so, so interconnected, right? Like prolapse, where our organs basically start
Yeah.
falling out of place, the incontinence, like you're talking about. And so much can be done by repairing that tissue. But even if we're told something at women, so many times it's like, do a Kegel. Well, most
Yeah.
people are not even doing Kegels correctly. And I
Well,
have,
or overdoing it sometimes. Yeah. Not doing it correctly, or there's excess. It's just like, sorry to interrupt you, but
no, you're
I
fine.
feel like I see this all the time. Like, just like say another muscle group, when your body's like muscles are not firing optimally, similar to Kegel, a certain part of your pelvic floor could be overcompensated and really, really, really tight too. And so doing that Kegel repetitively isn't supporting the issue.
Correct. Like you might be doing like squeezing wrong where you're tonifying some muscles and other muscles aren't getting
Yeah.
squeezed correctly, or it's really interesting. I've done interviews myself with like people that are Kegel experts and other people that are jade egg experts. And
Mhm.
there's this huge almost like competitive thing between the Kegel people and the jade egg people. And it's very interesting. They both have their reasons why they think the other one is not the proper way to heal the pelvic floor, to tone the pelvic floor. But people that are really into how to properly do a Kegel and teaching women to squeeze all the muscles correctly, teaching women to relax all the muscles. Their biggest thing
Yeah.
against the jade egg and that whole methodology is that it's about tightening so much. And with that,
Yes.
just like, you're kind of hinting at here, like, it's not just about like the tightening, like we have to make sure that things know how to squeeze properly and contract, but also relax.
Yes. Yeah, totally. The relaxing is so important. So I'm curious. There's so much I want. I'm just excited to still be here and just taking in a lot. Um, if somebody is listening to this, and there's someone who just feels like they don't like their body, they feel really uncomfortable in their body, and so then the idea of being sexually intimate with somebody feels like, oh, kind of thing, like that feels scary. I would love, yeah. What would you say to them to help support them? And, but they want, the idea of being, having more sex or having more pleasure feels great. But like, there's this part of that's even maybe if they are intimate with their partner, it's hard for them to fully receive in the pleasure of the experience because of their own insecurities.
There's so much to say here. I so
Yeah.
appreciate this question. And it's interesting from that like body confidence and body image perspective, because there's so many areas in health where dysfunction and imbalance like creates a vicious cycle. So there's actually research that have been shown that having sex or engaging intimacy actually will improve body image. So the vicious cycle we get into is like we're not intimately engaged because we feel not comfortable in our body, and then we're not having sex, and actually having sex has been shown to help to fix that problem. So that's one thing to realize, is just like part of the way out is sometimes just going for it and allowing your body to feel embodied and to feel the pleasure no matter how you're feeling about your body. Another thing I think is really important to realize is another thing we see is that body image, as far as or body beauty, I should say, how other people and how partners and people of all sexes and orientations feel oftentimes, is that there's different body types for different people. Some people love petite tiny women. Other people love just voluptuous and curvy women, right? So there's really, I feel like, deeply a body type for every person. So one, and oftentimes this body type, like if somebody really like just loves a woman, which is a big beautiful round body and tons of curves and super voluptuous, that person's might not find a very petite tiny woman as attractive. So there's something to be said, first of all, I think, about finding a partner who loves your body the way it is. right? And I think
Mm.
that's really, really important to be said, because there is somebody for everybody. And I think if we're constantly trying to change our body image to fit what somebody else's idea of beauty is, that might not be the best way to go about it.
Yeah.
And, personal confidence is, no matter what size we are, like, personal confidence is a huge thing, right? I've seen people when they get tinier than they want to be and they can't eat for some medical reason, and they lose a lot of weight and they feel horrible about their body. And of course, I've
Mm.
seen the opposite. People gain weight and feel horrible. So it can go every way. So I really think another thing that is super important is spending time just with loving your body and all of its parts. Like, no matter what size I've personally been, and I've been 50 pounds heavier and 15 pounds lighter than I am right now. So I've been a lot of different sizes in my life. And no matter what size I am, I've learned that there's just like parts of my body where it's very easy. If I look in a mirror, I'm gonna be like, that part's not good enough, and that part's not good enough. And that's been true when I've been a size 4. It's been true when I've been a size 18, right? So that has happened across the board. And what I have to say to that is, I think the more we spend time with those parts, and this is where personal touch, whether
Mm.
it's through self pleasure or whether it's just putting our hands on our body and actually
Exactly where my
breathing.
head went. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
exactly. Putting our hands on your body. And it's like, let's say that, you look in a mirror and you're not pleased with your hips, or you're not pleased with your thighs or your calves, for example. Putting our hands on on that part of the body and actually breathing literal love, like imagining love going to that part, imagining acceptance going to that part. And we can do this, right? We can do this in a way where it's like, I think another thing to say is the paradox of all this. A lot of people think that, like, that if we do this, we're like accepting means that we're not trying to change too. And the paradox means that we can still want to improve our body. We can still work on exercise and good diet to actually make changes, while also at the same time, paradoxically, loving and appreciating and honoring our body for exactly how it looks. Because it's so
Mm.
easy. Like, we're never going to look like an airbrush model unless we start getting airbrushed and do all these things, right? So it's so easy to always chase that next thing. So wherever we're at, I think just spending time, hands on our body, breathing into that part of our body, telling that part of our body that we love it and that it's
Yeah.
beautiful no matter where it's at, can go a long, long way.
Yeah. So good. So good. Yeah. I mean, and just to piece apart, to emphasize even what you shared of, like, you've been on, you've had a range of shape in your own body, and how, whether your body was on the smaller or larger side of that spectrum, it didn't really necessarily shift the thoughts or the feelings towards it. Right. And I think that's important to emphasize, of like, but that how often, especially I think for women, it's not just women alone, but how many of us are just in that zone of like, if it just lost the 10 pounds, if I just lost whatever, then XYZ would happen. And so it's actually not related to that. It's like when we can come into ourselves and learn to accept us as we are, accept our body, that's what gets to feel good. Because if we're always chasing this external thing, that's actually very disembodied and disempowering, because it's this disempowered expectation that's not, I don't know, it's just it's likely not even what your heart really, really wants. It's what you've been conditioned to think of how you should look and be.
Yeah, exactly. It's like changing the physical is not going to change the mental. We can change them both, but in
Yeah.
order to really be happy and confident with our body, typically we need to make sure we're working on the mind. And I'm always, as a naturopathic doctor, I'm always such a fan of like health and improving diet and improving
Yeah.
lifestyle, and making sure that we are doing our best to maintain proper weight to avoid things like joint pain and diabetes. And I think there's health benefits from a maintenance of a healthy weight for sure. And
Mhm.
beauty, though, it's like I feel like we need to almost disconnect health and beauty. Like, there's certain things where it's like
Mm.
run blood markers, and it's like if you have metabolic syndrome, you have high cholesterol and blood sugar issues, like, yes, oftentimes taking weight off can really help those things. So we have that health. But just because you're having that metabolic syndrome does not mean that just because you have a health issue, your body can still be completely beautiful exactly the way it is. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the confusion that I think we have in society.
It's good. And it's so important that you mentioned the self-touch. I think that, it's just so like, if it's on my thighs that I'm challenged with, or my belly, or my breast, or my arm, just giving it daily contact with like from your own hand is huge. It's so good that you like, that's right where my head went. And because then too, it's like, I'm not trying to mentally overpower, like I'm just need to be confident, or I'm not going into this place of self-judgment because I can't accept this part of my body. It's just like, okay, every day I'm going to acknowledge and just be with this part of my body. That's it. Right. And how honoring is that, to just honor yourself with that contact and that touch, which can be so simple. Right. It's not another like, oh, practice thing I have to do. It's just like, no, every day I just touch this part of my body and I'm just with it and I just breathe. And how
Yeah.
amazing. That in of
Yeah.
itself is so deeply healing, so nourishing.
It really is. It really is. And the other thing I think we should add to this question is the concept of these sensual dance and pole dancing types of classes that, we both have engaged in, because I've gotten so many things out of these classes, but I would say one of the number one things is actually tied back to this concept and this topic at hand, which
Yeah.
is in these classes for our listeners. It depends upon how the class goes, but some of these classes are done where at some point there's one woman in the center dancing and every woman is just in a circle, like watching and supporting. And so it's been
Mhm.
very interesting to witness women in these scenarios, because of course we have, just like in life, in these classes, we have women with tons of different body shapes, tons of different points in motherhood and parenthood and all sorts of different things, right? And the biggest thing I feel like I have seen in women that are like exuding sensuality and sexuality has nothing to do with the shape of their bodies. It has to do with really this topic, how embodied they are, how confident they are in the way their body moves. And no matter what the shape or
Trusting
size.
how their body wants to move.
Yeah,
Trust is huge. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so it's been such a good teacher for me, right? To be in this witnessing role and be like, observing, oh, what looks sexually, what is sexually appealing, what is sensually appealing, what looks confident. And it really is all about how much the woman is owning her space and owning her sensuality and owning her body. It's not about what she's wearing, it's not about how hot she is, it's not about what her body or face looks like. It's how much she's showing up and fully moving from the core essence of who she is. That's
Mhm.
really what I feel like exudes sensuality and sexuality. And I would have never seen that like witnessed in a way that was so profound that makes me believe that to the very core, if it wasn't for these classes we take.
Sure. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Yeah. Yeah. So kind of to like bring all of this together for somebody, if someone's wanting to live a more, embodied life, which I think is that radical choice it's a daily consistent choice. And it might be something, you might share here something you've already shared before, but what suggestion or insight would you offer?
I think we can look at this, to take it back to the kind of four areas that I mentioned before, but to make it more actionable, right? So if we're not living an embodied life and we're saying it's a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual reason, and oftentimes there's these four pillars that are involved in embodiment. So we can answer that by going through and saying, okay, well, let's take an action step from each pillar, right? So I would say from a mental standpoint, I think the idea of doing these mental types of practices that are also going to be a little bit physical, but going through from our minds and saying, okay, well, what part of me is not present? What part of me, because the idea of embodiment, like how I'm defining it, right, is that ability to be present and experience pleasure. So then from the mental component of that, we need to practice that. So maybe that's meditation, maybe that's visualization, maybe that's breath work, but something that is that practice of being present. Maybe that involves a weekly rolfing or massage, something that is basically about being present and training the mind to be present in the moment. So even if it's 2 minutes a day, everybody, like this doesn't have to be a huge thing, but I would definitely take that action step. I definitely think from, the physical standpoint, this is why I do have a quiz for people. So my quiz is libidoquiz.com. And on that quiz, you can go through and it'll actually tell you, it's a pretty cool quiz. And at the end, it's going to say, oh, physically, your stress response, your adrenals are mostly out of balance, or your neurological system, or your cardiovascular system. And so that can lead you to some of the physical root causes that might actually be preventing you from being fully in your embodied self, fully in your pleasure self. So go take my libido quiz. That's a great physical one. And then also from the standpoint of other things like emotional, right? From an emotional standpoint, I think some of it really comes down to doing things like a journal exercise where we're honest with ourselves, like, and asking ourselves a few basic questions like, what is stopping me from feeling fully in my body? What am I afraid of? Are there conversations? Are there things that are off topic for my partner? And from, a sexuality standpoint, am I having sex that I enjoy? So many people are not embodied intimately because we're just having the wrong type of sex for our body, right? So asking yourself good questions, journaling, and just being honest with yourself. There's no right or wrong answers, but, from an emotional standpoint, I think that's a huge component. And and spiritually, I would say it really just depends upon your own beliefs. But I think we can do a lot with, with embodiment through spirituality, and whether that is through prayer, whether that is through, again, meditation, whether that is through holding intentions and affirmations. And, part of a spiritual practice that we're talking about that could be linked to a level of spirituality is putting our hands on our body and saying we love it. Like that can be, very, very spiritual. So, and the biggest thing I always like to tell people when I give action steps is like, from a habit changing perspective, their action steps work the best when you resonate with them yourself. So like, so it's like if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm just not into meditation. I tried that. I just hate it. Fine. Like it's like the point is finding something that works for you that's going to bring you into the present moment. And maybe it's not meditation. Maybe it's breath work. Maybe it's dance. Maybe it's yoga. Maybe it's something else, right? But the intention
is walking your dog in the sun.
Right. There's so many things, right? There's so many things. So the idea is to get to the underlying point of what we're trying to do, which is in this example, bring one back to the present moment, get one's head out of the multitasking, the things that we do and do particularly easy as women, just because of how our brains work, and bring oneself back to the moment. And so having a daily activity, no matter what it is, where we practice that and that you enjoy doing, so you continue to do it every day, is what's most important.
Great. So good. So good.
Amazing.
Awesome. So share where people can find, obviously we have the quiz, which we'll have linked in show notes, but where can people find out more about you, more about Libido Doc? I know you have a summit coming up very soon.
Yeah, so I want to make sure. So when this is live, we're actually going to have just launched the summit. So you guys, this is a sexual health summit. And it's really, though, I wish we'd have actually framed this differently, because I think it's beyond just sexual health. It's about embodiment. It's about relationships. It's about pelvic care. It's about how to support anti-aging. There's so many things at this summit. It is centered around sexual health, but you get all of these other things: how to prevent incontinence, right? How to have these long-term happy relationships, how to communicate with your partner, how to have great sex, but also how to make sure your cardiovascular system's healthy, on and on and on and on. So really, really amazing. I know Emily's going to put the links for you guys in your show notes. It is totally free when we are live doing this. So I would definitely recommend to get on it, literally now, because we just basically started the summit. So you have a lot of time to listen to a lot of amazing speakers. And then of course, take my libido quiz to learn more about your own functional, say, physical imbalances that could help with your embodiment, your intimacy, and relationships. And then you can find me also on my my own podcast, which we should interview you on, at the Libido Lounge. So definitely check out the Libido Lounge podcast. And then my website is My Libido Doc.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll have everything linked in the show notes. Check out Diane's work. Such incredible, so much good resources that she has and offers. So don't hesitate, and definitely go check out the summit too. A lot of good interviews, and I'm excited about it. I'm going to be checking it out and tuning in. So yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for being here. I think this was great. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. And I'm just really grateful for you and grateful for the time. And there's a lot of good juice in here. So awesome. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I appreciate your time, and hopefully there's, at least one takeaway that you got from Dr. Diane that you will, resonates with you, that you'll really kind of hook into your system to kind of help support yourself in continuing and establishing a habit that creates more embodiment, that creates more pleasure, more aliveness, more presence in your life. That's what we're all here for, right? That's what we all are hoping for and intending for. So awesome. And check out her summit, check out her free quiz. All right. Take care, everyone. And thanks again, Dr. Diane.
Bye, everybody.